Thank you all so much for being here. Today, we're going to be discussing the Document Automation Bootcamp series, which is going to be a three-part series. The first one we're doing today is around estate planning examples. And then next week, I'm going to go into probate examples. And then the week after that, I'm going into family law examples. This is a brand spanking new presentation. So if I mess up, please just give me a little bit of grace. I'm really excited to do this with you. I wanted to do something a little bit different, where in this particular session, we're spending a little bit more time together, and we're actually going to do some hands-on practical training within Gavel. So if you already have a Gavel account, that's fine, but we're going to be using a practice account today, so you can just have a place that you can play and you're not going to mess anything up that you already have set up. So just refer to the email that I sent you with your login instructions and where to log in for today's session. And we're going to spend all of our time there. And then you can apply the principles that we learn in this session to your main account. For those of you that are new to Gavel, don't worry. We're going to start from the basics, and then we're going to work into more complex things, but starting with some basic foundational elements and moving into practical and technical instruction. So I'm really excited for all of you to be here and spend your time with me today. So let's go ahead and kick it off. So who am I to even be talking about all of this? My name is Brittany Hernandez. Some of you know me. And for those of you that are new to me, I am a licensed attorney based out of California, and I'm the head of legal innovation at Gavel, which means that I love this tool so much that I want to share it with other people. And I'm a nerd, so I spend way too much time in here, and I want to share what I've learned and how to use the tool appropriately so that you can think about your data in a way that allows you to move it from one place to another in a really streamlined manner. So for our agenda, we're going to break this session up into a couple of different parts. And I've kind of structured this in a way that starts with the end goal and some context, so you can see what we're working towards in these 2 hours that we're going to spend together. I'm going to leave 10 minutes at the end, but you can also ask your questions during the presentation in the chat as you think of them. And Maddie or myself will pick them up as we're going along in different breaking points. We are going to also talk about strategic client intake, which I always think is the main starting point for how we want to think about how we manage our data, how we generate our documents, how we think about a unified and streamlined system. The next piece we're going to go into is automating custom templates. So for custom templates, what we want to do is think about our own documents that would be non-standard forms. So these are forms that you have created and built out over many years as you're a subject matter expert in your practice area, and your own PDF or Word documents. Then we're going to think about how we can use pre-built workflows, which are workflows that you don't have to necessarily set up yourself. You could make changes to them, but they've already been pre-built out by a Gavel expert in conjunction with a subject matter expert for that practice area. And then we are going to go into this idea of how could you work with an expert. And the way that these last 3 pieces are structured is from degrees of involvement of the building process. So what I mean by that is you as the owner of the Gavel account have the option to build everything yourself from scratch. We have many examples of people who love to do that. I'm one of those people who I love being in the tool. I love playing with all the different logic and understanding how data flows together and thinking about how I want to package these and send them to my clients. And I really want to be fully involved and have a high degree of involvement in that building process. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. But if you are somebody who uses a lot of standard forms very often, and you are in a particular practice area and jurisdiction that allows for a lot of standardized forms, what we've done is we've created a campaign that makes it to where we actually are the people who hire the experts and put them together with a subject matter expert and a lawyer in that field to come up with to build out the workflows for you and the questionnaires that you can generate all of your different documents at once using this form that's already been built out for you. So I'll show you what that looks like as well, and you'll get to play with that and see some examples. And then the working with an expert part would be the part where you have the lowest degree of involvement in the building process, meaning that you're working with a Gavel expert who can combine these 2 other pieces for you. So they'll see where it might be appropriate to create your custom templates, and you would work with them on how to do that, but they would be involved in the process of actually going into the tool and building out the workflows. And they would also help you to see and understand how to connect those to the pre-built workflows that were built by someone that was not them, or if they were the ones that built it, how you can link those two together. So I hope that makes sense as far as structure goes, that I'm going to show you what it looks like, what the ultimate goal is. We're going to talk about intake, then all these different degrees from high to low of degrees of involvement in the building process. So if you already know what kind of person you are, and you're somebody who just wants to hire this out and delegate this out, I can actually save you a lot of time by saying, I can show you, point you over to the hired expert. But if you want to spend the time building and digging into these two topics as well, then let's stick together and go through it piece by piece. I saw a chat, so I'm just going to see. Yeah, so Maddie's in the chat if you have any questions as we go along. But I just want to say, I know that we have about 25 people, so that is an excellent number and exactly what I was shooting for, because I wanted this to be a smaller, more intimate workshop so that we have the time to really sit with ourselves and kind of figure out what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and go on to our first piece, which is around our end goal and some context. So our end goal in this whole entire process, if we really take a high level overview of what is the purpose of using legal technology or tools in general, like this, in order to, what are we trying to do? So what we're trying to do with these different tools from an outcome first process is we want to have a unified, streamlined system that optimizes the experience both for you yourself and for your clients. So we want to think about how we can consider the different tools that we have at our disposal, especially within a cohesive system like Gavel, for example. How does it play well with others? For example, does it have integrations with DocuSign so that we can send things off for DocuSign signature? Does it have a payment integration so that we can have and collect payments from the start, for example? And do we have it connect to another legal practice management solution, such as Clio or Decision Vault or Leadly or other tools? We want to think about how data can be streamlined and repurposed across multiple different contexts. So that's the end goal. So let's see what an example of what that looks like. The first example I want to show you is the example of a pre-built workflow. So we talked about this idea of there's some that we build ourselves from our custom templates that we aren't licensing to other people or we don't want other people to see. And then we have these pre-built workflows, which are built for us, and they have all of these different standard forms that a lot of people use, or that were licensed and other people are allowing us to use them, or we have someone build these all out for us. Let me just quickly see. Does Gavel integrate with MyFace? Cindy, that's a great question. So we do have a scenario that I have come up with that you can use Zapier to connect these two systems together. So if you want, if you could email me, I'm going to put my email in the chat for everyone anyway. So if you can email me and I can send you the video of how you might put these two together. And Maddie's answered that as well. So as I mentioned, for our example, I'm going to show you what it would look like if we have the process of a client who we've already had our initial consultation with them, and we've sent them a link to fill out a questionnaire so that we can intake their information. But we've also now assigned them a workflow to work on. So let's break this down a little bit more. So I'm actually going to go over to a different profile. Let me just find that here. So the scenario is that, like I said, we have met with this person. We want to prepare an engagement, or we've already prepared an engagement agreement for them. And what we want them to do is complete a workflow that is going to generate multiple documents for them around an estate plan. So the example that we're using is going to be found. You can look at gavel.io with me, but this is also going to be in your practice accounts. If we go under, if you go to gavel.io and we go under product here, you'll see a section down here where it says no setup automated forms. No setup automated forms. So the one we're going to use, these are all the different pre-built workflows that I mentioned where They're not our custom templates, but they're ones that are including a lot of things that people use over and over again. So we don't have to build them out ourselves. They've already been built out for us. And we can filter those down by jurisdiction and or practice area, for example. So if I'm in California and I practice in estate planning, I can see what different options might be available to me to just use right away. So for example, I could have this California estate planning package with an amendment and revocation documents. I can have a pet trust. I could have a power of attorney for a child, an estate plan for a small estate affidavit. I could have a digital asset trust, a joint fee agreement, or this one here, a California estate planning package without a trust for an individual or a couple. You can see all of these different options here. So in our case, I'm actually going to be using one that is this one here, a California estate planning package with a trust for a couple. So you see that you have the option to add it to your account or try the workflow. In our case, I'm just going to show you what it looks like to try the workflow. And in this case, because I've already filled this out before, it's populated all of my documents for me automatically. And you can see how many are, it kind of went a little fast to show you what happened, but just to show you that because I'm logged in as the client, because I've completed all of this information before, meaning I've answered these questions previously, it's not going to ask me those questions again. I've already given this information before, so we're benefiting here from something called data persistence. And this is why it's important to think about strategy and how you use things together, how your process includes and involves the client in this process, because if they have a client portal that they can log into, they can get assigned workflows, they can log in when you assign them something, and whenever they fill out the information, not only is that stored for us, but it's also stored for our client so that they're never typing in information that they've already given us previously. So that's really, really important. And here in this scenario, what I've done is I'll go over to my Gavel main account first. So this is my main Gavel account. So I have said as the attorney or as the law clerk that I'm ready to send or assign a particular workflow to my client for them to fill out. In this case, it's an estate planning package that's going to populate all these documents. And then once that's done by the client, I can go through, review them, make sure that we set up the next meetings or whatever else we need to do so that we can get those executed. So what I've done on my side is I've looked for my particular one that I want to assign. So in my case, that's this estate planning package with trust for a couple in California. And I've just said, assign this workflow. And then I've chosen who I want to assign the workflow. I can also see who it's currently assigned to, and I can look for the status of that in our data manager, for example. But I can see that I've assigned this to this person. I could assign this to other clients as well, but I can see that I've already sent that out to this person. Now, once I assign that particular questionnaire to our client here, the client has an email that gets sent to them automatically that says, hey, this person has assigned a workflow to you. Please log in to see it. When they go to their client portal, they're going to see something like this. In my case, I've assigned to this person different bundles and different workflows that they need to use. So they've been notified that they need to do something, and they've been given a place where they can log in, see whatever they've answered or done in the past, and they can simply run the workflow. And like I said, because they've run they've answered some of these questions before, it's only going to show them things that are, let's say in this case, these are like information pages. And then also if there were any questions that they haven't yet answered, then they would go through, they would answer those different questions. It's going to ask them to review their information, and then it will generate and populate all those documents that we saw in that example at the end. We have a couple of things going on in the chat, so I'm going to quickly check. Assign, or you can send the link. Correct. Yes. So that's a good question. You don't always have to assign it to the person. You can just go to your dashboard, find the link that you want, or find the workflow that you want to send to somebody. In this case, it's this one. And instead of using this assign workflow button, you're going to instead use this copy workflow link like this. You just click on that and it's copied right there. So that's how you would do that as well. So the way that you would set up a client portal is essentially what happens, and then we're going to go into this actually in a second when we talk about user roles. So essentially, when you create a Gavel account, you're given a unique what's called subdomain. So if you see how in this particular example, I have demo.gavel.io like this. If you were to click on demo.gavel.io, you'd be taken to a screen that looks like this. And you'd be, well, sorry, in this case, sorry, not that particular case. Well, it would look like that where you would have to sign in. So when you sign in or create an account, then the person would create an account and you would see that they've been created in your back end here. So you'd be able to see who is a user, who is a builder, and so on. Now, I don't want to get too much into those roles just yet, so we can build the foundation first. But that's a good question. All they need to do is you just send them the link to your subdomain, and then you just have them create an account. And then it will, by default, make them a user, which is the view that you saw when I showed you the example. Okay, awesome. So in this particular case, let's go back to where we are here. So those are examples of how we can take, for example, someone where we have sent them the link to fill something out, or we've assigned the particular workflow to their client portal, and they've been able to generate, in that case, all of these different documents that they can we can instruct them what to do with them. So for example, we could have some instructions in an email that gets sent to them along with all of those documents that says, go through and print these out and go get them signed. Or you can say, we need to set up a meeting where we can do a signing meeting with a notary, whatever the case may be in that particular context. But if you notice, if we go back actually to the example, there's an option for me after I generate all these documents with all these different questions that I've answered. I have the option to download it as a zip file, so I don't have to individually download all of these millions of documents. All I have to do is actually just say, download this as a zip file. In this case, I have quite a few different documents, and then I also have a lot of logic that's running, so it kind of takes a second, because I've also not only generated the documents for this main client of mine, but also for their spouse. So you can see that I have Demetria's advanced healthcare directive, I have her husband's pour over will, as well as hers, and so on. And I would just say down here at the bottom where it says download all documents as a zip file, I just say download all. And then when I save that, what I'll see is her completed documents like this. So I can go in and see her, that's just a designation information. But let's say, for example, that I have her advanced healthcare directive with her particular information here and her different selections as far as what her choices were, if she wants to have her life prolonged or whatever the other options were that she answered here. Great. So we can see that through this process, we're able to have a single place for our client to go to, and also an automated way to send them information to fill out for us. And that through their answers, if they've answered a question previously, that data will persist as long as we go through the process that we're going to talk about now with those foundational elements of variable strategy and mapping and thinking about how data moves from place to place. But essentially, we're able to streamline their process of sending us information, and we're not having to type in things that we need to collect from them anyway. So I'm going to pause really quickly there to see if there are any quick questions before we move on to the 3Ds. Okay. And don't feel shy to ask questions. I encourage them. And as you see, we'll pause at different points, and Maddie's got me in the chat as well. Okay, so now that we've seen the example of how to populate multiple documents at once with lots of different information, we'll move on to the 3Ds. Sky's question here is, these templates or workflows are free to use with a Gavel account? That's a great question. So there is are two different options here. As you saw, there was add workflow to my account, and then there was try the workflow. So if you go to gavel.io and you go to that place that we saw on the webpage where we saw all of the different options for pre-built workflows, if you just say try the workflow, that is free for you to use. So you would be able to generate the documents. However, if you don't, so if you could not have a Gavel account, a paid Gavel account, for example, and still use those workflows. So technically they are free. If you wanted to have them added to your Gavel account so that you could benefit from having that data manager piece that we're going to show you, similar to what you saw in that example where data can persist through different workflows, for example, then you would need to have your paid account. And to have them added to your account, you would need to be on the pro plan. I hope that answers that question. Caitlin asks, what if you have old clients? What if you have old clients who don't use a computer? That's a great question. If they have a phone, you could give them a call and then have them talk you through the different questions. And then you can you can fill it out yourself. And then that's going to get stored for you, and it will still be stored in a way that you can push around as I'll show you in a minute. So perfect. Great question though. I've actually had that question before, so I was ready. Okay, cool. So let's talk now about some different foundational pieces of context for how we mentally think about these different pieces, how we think about data, how we think about documents, and how we think about delivery. And when I talk about data, I'm talking about that incoming data from our clients. So for example, we just mentioned with the question about if I have somebody who could be young or could be old who doesn't have access to computer, then what they could do is call you from a payphone if they don't have a phone either, and they can tell you the information. You can run and fill out the workflow for them and have all of that information captured in the data manager for repurposing and reuse later on. And when I talk about repurposing and reuse of data, what I'm talking about is the ability to not only have it persist, like I showed you, and when I say persist, that's the ability to have it stay there and not go away if we're having somebody fill out a different workflow or a different questionnaire that asks, some of the same questions and some different questions. So under that kind of data umbrella, we can think about data that comes into us from whatever means, whether they fill that out in their client portal, if we send them the link, if we fill it out for them, whatever that information may be, people's names and addresses and their date of birth, their social security number, or whatever other information we might need to collect. We want to collect it in a strategic way that allows us to reuse that information in the future. That's why, for example, with Sky's great question about whether the pre-built workflows are available for free or if you need to have a Gavel account, they are free for you to use, but the benefit of having an account is that you're able to add them to your specific subdomain, and you're able to, from there, push the information around and have your clients have client portals like I showed you, so that we can reuse and repurpose that data multiple times in the future instead of, okay, we used the workflow, but we didn't have the data stored anywhere. So if we ever need to run it again, we have to type in the information again. Even though that's still a useful tool, even when it's free, you're going to maximize the benefits if you use it and have it added to your Gavel account. So that's the difference there. The other piece I want to talk about under data is the idea of conditional data. So what I mean by conditional data is that you're able to add different conditions around not only which documents generate, but also within those documents, what pages show, what clauses show, what different, let's say letters or numbers or number calculations or date calculations. You can have all of these things be conditional because you're going to have different circumstances from matter to matter or person to person, right? So we want to think about how we're going to be able to do some different conditional logic around the data that we receive. Another piece under this is going to be outgoing data. So how do we send information to our clients? Can we automate the process of sending emails, for example, like I showed you where I just assigned something? Or if at the end of a workflow, when somebody completes it all the way to the end, that triggers an automatic email that lets them know what the next steps are, sends them those documents. Like I mentioned, we could say, after completing this, now we need you to set up a meeting with us. Here's our booking calendar so that we can make sure that you get these notarized. The next piece is around documents. So we talked a little bit about some standard forms and how you might think about using standard forms that have already been automated, and then also the custom forms that you might want to automate yourself. And then under the delivery piece, we're just thinking about that process of, do we send them in an email? Do we have them access or download them from the client portal? Do we want to, have them sent via post, for example? There might be an interesting scenario where you use other tools like a Zapier or Make, Zapier and Make are tools that allow you to link disconnected tools together. So not every, Gavel, for example, has native integrations with like Clio and Stripe and DocuSign and Decision Vault and all these different tools. But if you don't have something like we talked about with my case, then it allows you to link those disparate things together. Now, one of the things you might do is maybe there's something on Zapier that allows you to trigger that these documents get printed and then they get sent off in the post. So just thinking about how we deliver these documents in an automated way. The next piece I want to talk about is going to be foundational for what we're going to do today. The 3 stages I want to talk about are pretty standard across most law firms, I would imagine. As I mentioned, I am a lawyer as well. So when I was practicing as a sole practitioner, I would take in information from the client. I would do my conflicts checks, make sure that I'm able to work with them, make sure that it's a matter that I can deal with my different caseload. When I'm ready to engage them as a client, we've gone through all of our different qualification criteria. Then I would send them an engagement letter with the different scope of our representation and our compensation structure. And then I would execute on what we've been engaged for, right? So this is a very standard kind of structure that we're going to play with today as well in this idea of intake, engagement, and execution. And if you have a different structure from this, that's okay too. Maybe you do things in a different order or whatever the case may be, but the general idea being that it's helpful or useful to map out your process, whatever it may be, because you're able to visualize where you might have touch points where you can automate different pieces of your process. So speaking of automating the different pieces of your process, what I'd like for you to do is just keep in mind that you need to find the email that I sent you that gives your login information. It will be something like Gavel practice plus a number at gmail.com. And then your password will be like a 4-digit number with an exclamation point. So if you can make sure that you have that handy and open, that would be perfect. Before we talk about strategic client intake in depth, I want to go over a couple of foundational elements, some of which we've already touched on actually, which are user roles and client portals, data management and persistence, and variable strategy and library. So some of the things that I'm teaching today are from my own experiences and best practices as I've been building. It doesn't mean that it's the only way that you can do it, but it's how I, as somebody who really loves this tool and spends a lot of time in it, thinks about how to use variables, how to use, and we'll talk about what those are and you'll see what they are if it doesn't make sense right now. But just know that we're going to kind of touch on each of these pieces to make it really easy to understand. So when we talk about user roles and client portals, we've already seen an example of that. If you notice that when I showed you this screen looks very different from the screen that I showed you when I was showing you what my client's portal looked like, right? Their portal had assigned workflows, they had different bundles, and they had past sessions. And ours, we have a different button here, which is new workflow. We have the ability to edit and run different workflows, where workflows are just another word for a questionnaire where you have a set of questions and answers. And you can see lots of different options here on the left. This is because I'm an admin or I have a builder seat. So when we talk about builder seats and licenses, I don't want to get too deep into it, but just the main idea here is that if we go into our account, if we're the admin, we can see this tab that says users here. And you can see that I've made all of you builders, but I can also see other roles such as organizational user, admin, and user. we talked about what happens or how do you make it to where someone can create an account with you, like a user account? That was a good question. The way that you could do that is two ways. You can have it to where you send them the link to your subdomain and you tell them to create an account, or you can add them as a user here, as I've done here on the top right, where it says add user, and you just assign them a role. And each of these roles is defined here. It's just important to understand different roles at a high level so that you understand that a builder seat is somebody who can create and build new questionnaires. An admin is somebody who can manage things like billing, add different users, things like that. A user is what we saw, where this would generally be something like a client, where they are able to see their past sessions, they can get assigned a session, they can log into somewhere and see and pick up where they left off. And then an organizational user is someone who is similar to a basic user account, but they also have their own data manager, which is a way for them to see the past times that they have run a session, but also to push that information into other workflows they're assigned, for example. Okay, so that is the general overview of user roles. So we can kind of get a sense that there are different seat types, different role types for different people who have different roles within your organization, people who create and build workflows, people who use workflows, and people who can manage their data when they take those workflows. So that's one of the key elements. The second one we want to talk about here is that data management and persistence piece. So we did see it a little bit on that piece around persistence, which is that idea that when I was logged in as the client, if they've answered the questions before, they're not prompted to answer those questions again, but they do have the ability to edit them if something has changed and rerun the workflow or regenerate the documents with the new information. Let's say they moved address or they changed their email address or whatever the case may be. They're able to do that very easily by just opening up their last session, editing that one piece of information, and regenerating the documents as needed. When we talk about data management, this is going to feed into this idea of variable strategy. This is around the idea of being able to take information that's collected in one place and move it over into another context. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, that I have a client intake form, which asks basic information about their name and their address and their phone number and email, and these types of information that we're going to actually move around quite a bit. Because whenever we prepare documents, even from the beginning point of the engagement agreement, we need to use their name again. So even just from collecting their information to talk to them on the phone and get to know them and get to know their case, we need to then reuse and repurpose that information in their engagement letter. And then from there, when we're executing our services for them, we're going to reuse their information in the documents that we prepare for them. So that idea of data management comes from being able to store it and reuse it in different contexts. I'm just going to quickly check the chat to see how we're doing here. To clarify, an admin has all permissions as a builder. Correct. They have all permissions as a builder and a few more. So they're able to do things like update the subscription, for example, and all like the payment information. They're able to change out things like the different users, for example, and their roles. So yes, an admin has all the same permissions as a builder, but a builder has less than an admin, for sure. Good question. So let's see an example of data management and how we can move things from one place to another. So if I go into my Gavel account, in this case, I'm going to go over to this one here. Let's say that I have a scenario where I am having the person do what's called like a lead generation tool. So what I mean by that is I'm having them interact with a Gavel questionnaire that asks them different pieces of information that will also provide them some piece of value. It's a marketing tool. So in this case, it's called an eligibility for a specially adapted housing grant. So what this is for military veterans, they are able to qualify for a particular type of grant if they have a service-connected disability. They're going to be using the grant money to buy, build, or change their permanent home, and they they own or will own the home. So I've created this little few question workflow in Gavel that makes it to where the person can indicate whether they have any of these things, and they can determine whether or not they may likely be eligible or not. And what happens for us on the back end is that we're able to see different people's answers, and we've been able to create a situation where we only ask people to book a time with us if, based on their answers, they may be eligible to work with us. And when we say work with us, that would be something like actually submitting the application for the grant for them or representing them on any appeals, etc. So in this case, I have a bunch of different logic attached both within the workflow and within my different documents to show or hide different things depending on someone's answer, but I want to tell them very early whether they may or may not be eligible. So I have it set up to where if the person says that they do not have a service-connected disability, meaning they've said none of the above, they're going to put in their information, their prefix, their first name, last name, and email address, their mailing address so that we can put this into the letter, but they're not going to see or interact with this page that says home information. And the reason for that is if they do not have a qualifying service-connected disability, they are likely not eligible because it's a necessary condition. So what's happened at the end of this is it's populated and generated a letter that has also been automatically emailed to this person that has populated the date. It has formatted their name and address. Here, for example, it has our letterhead and everything set up the way we want, but it's letting them know that based on their answers, they may not be eligible for this type of grant, because to be eligible, they need to have a qualifying service-connected disability, and they indicated that they don't have one of those. So they're kicked out of the workflow and given this information. And they also have this, as I mentioned, automatically emailed to their email address. Let me just show you that really quick. So they get an email that looks like this. You are able to customize who this is from. It's a little bit more of an involved process that we won't cover today, but just know that it is possible to have this sent from your law firm name, for example. So it says, "Hi, Mary. Thank you for taking the time to fill this out. Attaches your decision letter." So they can see their letter is attached here as well. So that all happens without us having to do anything extra. What you'll also note in this particular workflow, if I go back and I change my answer, which you're always able to do if you have this setting set up to where they have a review page. If I go back to this section and I change my answer, I can change the result. So now I'm a different person and I do have something. I have blindness in both eyes, or I have the loss of use of more than one limb, for example. Now I actually see a different page here. Now I see a page that I didn't see before. This is called home information. So this is useful in the context of, think about it less of this specific example and more in the logic that you use when you're preparing your own documents. So for example, if someone is not married, we wouldn't want to present them with a bunch of questions about a spouse. So we can use conditions around these pages as well as different questions to only show the pieces of information and the questions that are relevant for that particular person and their situation. So in this case, this person is 1 out of 3 eligible, but we have 2 more questions they need to answer to qualify. In this case, they need to be using the grant money to buy, build, or change their permanent home. If they say no, they don't see anything else. But if they say yes, they're going to see an additional question. Do you own or will you own the home? Which is the final necessary condition in this case. So if I say no, so I've had yes on the first condition, yes on the second condition, but I don't meet this third necessary condition, then I'm going to continue through. I'm going to have that letter generated and emailed to me, but I will still likely not be eligible. It's just for a different reason. So the generated letter looks like this now. It still says you may not be eligible, but remember before we had an entirely different section here. In the first instance, we had a bunch of bullet points that told us that you don't qualify because you don't have a service-connected disability. Now we're able to show instead, based on their answers, a different outcome. It's the same decision, for example, may not be eligible, but the reason is because you need to be using the grant money to buy, build, or change your permanent home. And own the home or be in a position where you will own the home in the future to qualify. So now if we're going to do it one more time, I'm going to change that answer from no to yes. So now I do meet all three conditions. Then I can have a different answer. So like I said, think about this less in the context of this specific example and more in the context of how you prepare letters and the different decisions that you make when you decide what goes in them or not. So when do you have your template and you go through and you say, I'm going to take this part out because this part's not relevant in this situation. Instead, we're codifying those rules into Gavel and structuring it in a way that says, every time you run this workflow, I want you to run it with these rules as the way that you run and prepare these documents. Now, in our example here, they have met all three conditions. So instead of seeing may not, they see you may be eligible. And we'd love to meet with them in the next week or so because they're someone we'd likely be able to work with. So we give them our initial consultation link and they can go ahead and book that. When they book it, they're going to get a link to our client intake form, which they can fill out the rest of the information that we need in order to double check on our conflict checks, for example, gather additional information about their particular circumstance. Now, we're in not the piece around logic right now. We're in the piece around data management, right? So let's talk about that next. So now that I have that person's information collected into our account, I can go into my data manager. So if your sidebar doesn't look like this, there's a little part in the bottom where you can expand and collapse this. So you would see under data manager that I can see what workflows have been run and how many times and who owns the template. So that goes to, for example, if you have different builders, so I can see that Danae builds this one. This is a general hello template, but this one's owned by me. I'm the one who created it. So I can see, as the admin, I can see everybody's workflows that's a builder or above, like a builder or an admin. So anyone who can build a workflow, I can see and utilize their different workflows. Just something to note as well if you have multiple builders. I can also see if a user was logged in. So I can see Demetria was logged in when she completed this workflow in the past, our previous example, our client, and then I'm the one who ran this one now. So I can take this information by putting this little check mark here, and I can move things that would be the same, things like her prefix, her first name, her last name, her email address and mailing address, anything that might be relevant in another context, such as in this case, a limited scope engagement agreement. I can find my next thing that I want to prepare based off of this information, select it from the options and say, push this into that next thing. So it's going to take a second to load, and then it's going to populate everything that is the same. So in this case, client's prefix, client's first name, client's last name, their email address, and their mailing address have all pushed over because we have made it to where the underlying variable, which we'll go into next, is the same as the one before. I think there was a question in the chat. Is there a way to change how this screen displays? I would like to have the client in the first column rather than scrolling over and over to see whose data I'm picking. So you're talking about the display, the screen display of the data manager, it seems like. And then, so Maddie was just saying that the data manager view is based on the workflow. So it goes into the order of the workflow. So for example, the first question shows up first, the next question shows up next. But if you want to think about how to filter this data, you can do that in here. So for example, if you're looking for someone specific, let's say that you have this structured where the name isn't first, so it's hard for you to see who it is without going like this for a long time, then you can use a filter. So for example, I can say filter it to where the user contains Brittany or Demetria in this case, to make it more simple. Then I can apply that and I can see all the instances where that is the case. You can do the same thing for other things as well. If a specific variable, it contains a certain value. So if you're searching for something specific, then that might be a good workaround for you if you're saying that like you want to be able to search for specific things without having to scroll. Does that help a little bit? me just double check to see that that tracked through. Okay, perfect. Good questions here. So now that we've pushed through information that does track and is the same, then all I need to do is add any additional information that I didn't have before. So in this case, I'm preparing a different type of form. I'm preparing an engagement agreement. So I'm going to give it a matter title. What you're noticing as well, perhaps, is in some instances, I have default values. So the one that I just did here pushed this information through from something else, but I can also have things that come up a lot be default values, so that I'm not having to retype the same type of matter title or the same county or jurisdiction or other types of court information, for example, over and over again, but I still have an option to change it if I want to. So just something to keep in mind here as well. So now I'm doing something called a repeating item. I'm interacting with something where I don't know in advance, maybe it changes from matter to matter, what types of services are included in this representation. So I can do that with this repeating item where I say, here are the things that I will include in this representation. I'm going to prepare an application for the specially adapted housing grant. And then also we talked about me preparing a uniform statutory power of attorney for them as well in our conversation. So I'm going to do those two things. I can add anything else. And then I can say what's not included. In this example, I'm going to not assist with an appeal of the decision should the application for the grant be denied. And I'm also not going to help with any litigation related to disputes arising from preparing this statutory for a power of attorney. Now, as you notice, this is a question type called a combo box. So within this repeating item, where the repeating item is allowing me to add an unlimited number of different options, or you can limit the options if needed, I'm also able to type my own other separate answer. So I don't have to use the options that are here, but I can. It is available to me. How do you do the default entry? That's a good question. Let me just populate this really quick and then I'll show you. So we've gone here. We've said what's excluded. I'm going to continue through, and then it's going to populate my document for me. And I have the ability, because I have this set up, to link to DocuSign, that I could submit this for signing. And that would send them over the document to sign through their email. So we can see that I prepared this. Everything has tracked as we did before. This is actually one of the templates we're going to play with today. I can see that the different scopes of services that I said are here and here. In this particular case, I have this as a pro bono one just because it was for a different example. But in ours, we're going to have a compensation structure here. Like I said, if I say submit for signing, I have this set up to send over automatically to the client. But as you can see, we were able to push information from one workflow into another using the data manager. I could then even take this information either from that first workflow, which could have been that lead generation tool or some kind of client intake form, and push it into now the uniform statutory form power of attorney, for example. So lots of different examples. So I'm going to quickly just show someone how to do the default value. Maddie has been kind enough to put it in the chat how to do it, writing it down. If you're a visual learner, what you would do is you would go into your, you would just go to your account, log in, find the workflow that you want to add default values for. In this case, I'll show you this one here. You just say edit to get into your editor view, which we'll play with a little bit today. And you see how there's settings here? There's a question type, and then there's edit, and then there's settings. You just go into the settings, and it's this option for default value right here. So you just choose what you want. In my case, I just chose one of these options. You could even type something in if you wanted to as well. In my case, for their first name here, because it's an example, I have it always default to Mary. That probably wouldn't be a good idea in your case if that's just something, because you don't want someone to have to then take more time to erase that in order to put something else. But if it's something that you use all the time, it's a good way to save some extra time as well, but still have the option to do something different or make a different choice if you want to. Okay, how's everybody doing so far? We're about 50 minutes in. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about variable strategy before we go into our exercise. So when we talk about variables, Variable is a term that means that you're able to specifically identify a particular question and the answer associated with that question. And it's a unique identifier that you can use in a workflow that makes it to where it's distinguishing that one from every other question so that you could then use that in other places in the workflow. For example, if you want to refer to that person's name later on, or you can put that in your document, or you can have that be the condition that is used to make things show or hide in different places. So variables are extremely important, and I see them as probably the most foundational element out of everything. And the way that I think about them is they're important because they are what allows you to have data persistence and data, the ability to push data from workflow to workflow. If you use a consistent variable strategy where, for example, whenever you have contact first name or attorney full name or any of these different questions that are asked a lot, or minors date of birth or guardians, whatever, or trustees, whatever, if you use those consistently, then you're able to move those pieces of information around like I just showed you. And you're also able to have your clients not have to retype information that they've already given you because you have it set up that way. So that's the strategy part. And the library part is that I like to keep a list of the ones that I use because they have to be exactly the same in order to work. So if you change a capital to a lowercase or you change one letter at the end, that will break that ability to push things around. So I like to keep a consistent library. So I'll quickly show you what those both look like before we go into our exercise. So as I showed you kind of in the back end, so when I talk about the back end or the editor, we can go into the editor view by saying edit. This makes it to where I can add any additional pieces or take away different pieces, add document templates or change my settings, for example. If I'm here, what I can see is that in this particular question type, this is a single select option, where a single select looks like a multiple choice question like this. In my question, this is what it looked like when it's shown to the person who's taking this, whether that's the client or yourself. I'm asking the question title, do you have one of the following service-connected disabilities, which in the live version looks like this. I have a variable name that shows to me in the editor, but not to the person. It's just a unique tag or identifier for this question for me. And then the choices are here, and they're shown here like this. So I can select from them, right? So the variable name is here, and it's something like service-connected disabilities in this case, which gives me a hint about what this question is asking and what the answers are, so that I can remember that as I use that information in the future. For example, in this particular case and workflow, I have attached logic to the first question to say when that home information page shows. Remember, I showed you that if the person said that they don't have a service-connected disability, then they just skip to the end. But if the person says that they do have one, then they're shown the home information page. That is logic that I have hinging on the answer to the first question's variable. So what that looks like here in the editor is I've said, only show this page in these circumstances. So I want you to hide this page if the answer to service-connected disabilities, the question that we asked first, this is the variable name to identify that question, if the value is none of the above. So that's how that piece works and why variables are important. Not only are they important to be consistent across different workflows, but also for being able to use them to understand which question we're referring to so that we can attach a logic to those questions or future questions. And then what my variable library looks like is like this. It looks crazy, so don't fret. It looks a lot less crazy. I've used this for the first time. It's called groups in Google Sheets, where you can expand certain sections together. So I like to keep track of what I've used for certain things. So for example, I have a section or category for contact information. My contact is going to be my main client, the person that has engaged me to work for them. So if this is company, so if you're more like business to business, Then maybe you have a company category and a contact category because you want to collect information about the entity that is your client, and then also the main contact for that particular company as well. So here, for example, I have this structure of main category, contact, and then subcategory, something like first name, middle name, last name, etc. I like to collect them in the first instance separately. So that gives me so much flexibility in the future to combine things. And I'll show you what that looks like. And we'll get to kind of see on the back end of your practice accounts what that looks like. But if you, for example, have in your client intake form, the first time your client ever fills something out and you just ask them, what's your full name? They will put that all on one line, and it limits your ability in the future to have that information separate. So if you notice when we prepared and generated the different letters, in some instances, we have their full name, meaning their first name and their last name. And in other instances, we have their prefix, such as Mr. or Mrs. or Doctor or whatever, and then their last name. So when we first collect the information from that client intake or strategic client intake standpoint, we want to collect the pieces of information separately. And then on our end, we can combine them in the future or have that running in the background without them ever seeing it, so that in the future workflows, we can just ask for that one line because we're pushing the information around. This can be hard to visualize, so I'll just show you what this looks like. So for example, if I go into my dashboard, I've created an intake questionnaire that I have sent to each of your practice accounts that you're able to see and interact with as well. And I'm just going to show you what it looks like on the front end and how I collect the information, and then what's happening on the back end. So if I run this intake questionnaire here, and my numbering system and lettering system is in such a way because workflows are presented in order of A to Z or 0 to 100. So I'm naming my templates like this so that I can have the ones that I want to show you at the top. So you might name yours differently. You might do them with your firm's name and then what it is. You might have it as the jurisdiction and the practice area, such as California family, and then what it is. Naming structure is important in the sense of where it resides on your dashboard, but also it's residing in the link that you send to someone or place somewhere. So if you change the name, it breaks the link. So something to keep in mind. Now, as I mentioned, you're able to see how I would collect this information separately for the first time. So when it's presented to the taker, they're going to put in their prefix. We could have default values for these as well if we generally work with a particular type of person, for example, or the person can type in their own if they have a preferred prefix that is not listed here. I'm going to collect their first name, their legal middle name, and their last name, their suffix. If they prefer to go by a different name, so for a lot of different people, and actually a lot of lawyers that I've met, they'll have like L. David Perry or whatever. So it's like Larry David Perry, but they go by David or whatever. So somebody can put in their preferred first name here, their gender, assigned at birth, preferred pronouns, etc. As they fill in this information, what's happening on the back end or in that editor view is I have combined all of these different things so that I can use them again in the future in different ways. Yes, William versus Bill is a great example, Tracy, as well. So people have their own way that they want to be referred to, or maybe they change their, whatever the case may be, they might have a different one that they want to use. So something to consider. So if I go into now this editor, if I go into the editor for this intake questionnaire here, then you're going to see a lot of invisible logic that I am using. Invisible logic is something that is not shown to the taker, but has a profound impact on what we can do within the workflow itself, the questionnaire, and also in your documents. So it's a very powerful tool that I'll show you what it looks like. So I'm very OCD about all of this stuff. So I like to think about every scenario possible and how you would attach logic to it and when they would have this suffix or prefix or whatever else. I didn't have time to do every single configuration, but just to show you, because on the first page, we asked questions about their prefix, their first name, their middle name, and their last name, and their suffix, preferred names, etc. we're able to combine now all of those things together in invisible logic. So the way that you would add invisible logic as a page is you would say add a page here, just to show you where this particular piece lives. You would say add question, and down here at the bottom under advanced, it says invisible logic. So you would just click that. When you click that, you see a screen that looks like this, where you can create new variables and add invisible logic. So in this case, I've created and combined the pieces that came before. And the client never has to say every variation of their name. We can combine that for them because we now have the different building blocks and pieces to do so. For example, I can say a single contact full name first and last and say that that variable that I created equals contact's first name, a space, and then contact's last name. So in every instance, I want that to be whenever I put this particular variable, I don't have to separately put these together. Whenever I put this one, it's going to combine those two for me. So if I was to, for example, have this be that initial client intake, and then I have a second workflow, which is my engagement agreement, I can have in my second engagement agreement just this one here, because when I push the information from the client intake form into the engagement letter, it's going to automatically do that combining for me. So I have things like contact full name with prefix, their prefix and their last name. And then I also have it to where their preferred full name first and last and with their prefix or whatever else. And the logic that I have attached to those is I've said, if they've said that they have a preferred first name, then I want contact preferred full name to be their preferred name and their last name. But if it's no, if they don't have a preferred name, then just use the full name one that was their legal name. So I know that talking through logic can be a little bit confusing, but the idea here is that we're just taking separate pieces that we collected in a strategic way to tease these things apart so that we can recombine them in any configuration we want later is an important concept. Okay, so we only have about an hour left, and I want us to be able to spend some time in our accounts together. So we're going to go into this other piece around automating custom templates. So this is that idea that we're not using, maybe we have a lot of forms that we can use that are pre-built, and we can go into that piece as well. And then maybe there's templates, though, that we want to keep to ourselves or that we've developed over many years that we want to still be able to use in this automated way, but we want to use our forms and not someone else's forms. So we can do this together, going through that process and piece of intake, engagement, and execution. So if at this point you could do me a quick favor and search for your email that gave you your login instructions, and you're going to look for, it's going to give you instructions for where to sign in, which should be workshop.gavel.io. And from there, you're going to have your sign-in instructions, which should be something like Gavel practice plus a number at gmail.com. And then the password will be a string of numbers with an exclamation point at the end. Now, does anyone not have this? Because there might be somebody who joined after I already sent them out, for example. If that's the case, then I'm going to ask that you refer back to this later, but I think everyone who signed up before the session was able to have that sent to them. Okay, good, awesome, thank you for letting me know you're logged in. So once you're logged in, what you'll see on your screen, login is saying that the email is incorrect. Okay, 1 second for you, Russ. Let me just get everyone set up. Yeah, if you do see an issue, please let me know and we'll just troubleshoot it right now because I don't want you to miss out on this piece. Give me 1 second. Russ, did you use Gavel practice plus 52? And then let me just see. All I'm going to send you the password again separately. Is that the password that you used as well? And if anyone else is having an issue, okay, so that's the password that you used as well. Okay. Okay, just give me 1 second. And if everyone else was wanted to take a quick break, just take like a 2-minute break and then come back. I'm gonna get rest sorted so that we can all read together. Can I just confirm, Russ, that you are logging in from workshop.gavel.io and not from gavel.io? Okay. Okay, so Lee said he initially had an issue when he copied and pasted the email. Okay. Let's try this. Oh, the plus turned into a percentage or something else. Okay. Well, Russ, I've just sent you a different username and password. And then let me just send the workflows that we're going to work on to that particular builder account so that you can see these as well. And then we're going to get started so that we have the maximum use of this time. I guess one thing I could show you while I'm doing this is how to send something to a builder. So we talked about the different roles. So I'm trying to send something to Russ so that he can follow along with us. And I need to send him a copy of the client intake form that I showed you. So for example, if I want to do that, I can send him a copy of this entire workflow to his account so that he can actually add it to his workflows. So I can do that using this send copy to builders button here. So not the assign one. Assigning would just have them run it. If you want to send the entire workflow to that person so that they can edit it and make changes or run it or whatever else, you say send copy to builders, and then you just search for that person. So in his case, he's practice account 54. And when I sent it to all of you, I just clicked each one of you because you can do more than one at a time. And then I'm going to say send a copy. And that's going to send that over to him. And it will, for him, look like what it looks like for you, where you can say, add this to my workflows. The other one I need to send him over is this estate planning package with trust for a couple for California. So I'm going to say, send that copy to that builder. I'm going to say account 54, and I'm going to say send a copy. So hopefully we have him sorted there now. Let me just double check. Signed in. Awesome. Will the video be sent out after the call? Yes. I think it will take a little bit of time for it to load or like process. So just give me a few hours or like 2 hours or so after the session. But I will send the recording out so that you can refer back to this if you need to go, for example, if you have another call. I know it's a longer session, but hopefully this content is very useful and then we're able to give you some practical experience with this tool. Okay, the other thing that I need everybody to do is I'm going to give you a link to a Gavel workflow that you are going to use in order to download the templates that we're going to work with. So the workflow I'm going to have you go to is in the chat now. So I'm going to have you go to that particular workflow. You'll see that it is utilizing default values, and it's also using conditional document language in the back end. So if you go to that link, what you're going to see is this. So this is a Gavel built or a workflow I built in Gavel, where I'm going to give you documents that instead of me having to kind of like attach them or email them to everyone. So I have all of these defaulted to the ones that you're going to need for today. And I want you to say continue. And then that's going to generate all of these documents because I have all of them selected. What I want you to do from there is to download all of these in your zip file. You could download them individually as well if you want to. But in this case, I want you to download all of them, and then we'll go from there. So let me know, maybe just give me some thumbs up or something in the chat if you have done so. So just say download all, and then you're gonna have them opened up so that we can start looking at those and automating them. So I'm gonna set a quick timer for, let's do like 20 minutes because we're running a little bit long. So we're going to time box this. So time boxing is just a way of making me stay on track so that we don't go over and I don't take up more than 2 hours of your time. But essentially what I want us to do is the first thing that you need to do is to add the workflows to your account after you've downloaded the templates. So we're going to download our templates using that link. Just say continue, download all, or download them individually. For that last one, where I gave you the option to download as a PDF or a docx for the limited scope engagement agreement, we're going to use the docx version. So download your templates, add the workflows that I sent to your dashboard. It's going to look like this. Down here at the bottom, you're going to see the intake questionnaire and the estate planning package with trust for a couple in California. Say add to workflows, and then we're going to build together. Okay, so now that everyone has been logged in and we've had a chance to get our accounts and our templates all set up, the first thing I want you to do is actually to observe that nothing is in your data manager. So first, that you have one, which is for admins and builders. So if you go to your data manager, which is here on the left under workflows, you can search by workflow or global, but we're going to say by workflow. If you say by workflow, you're going to see, in my case, I see a couple of different things, but you will see nothing because you haven't run anything and nobody else has run anything from the workflows that you have. So just observe that. But now what I want you to do is we're going to run the intake questionnaire. This is going to be our foundation to get all of the different pieces for our client that we can push in the future. We're going to pretend that you can put any client information that you want. So we're going to run this workflow, and going back to the earlier question about what if my client doesn't have a computer, this is how you would intake their information. So you just go to your dashboard, you go to your workflow that you want to run. In our case, it's this one here. I'm going to say run. And when I say run, I can fill out this information. So let's imagine that I'm on the phone with my client and I'm asking them, what's your name? So I'm going to say, okay, in this case, it's going to be Ms. Their legal first name is Mary. Their legal middle name is going to be Jane. Their last name is Watson. They don't have a suffix, and they don't go by a different first name. For their gender assigned at birth, they're female. They prefer the pronouns of she and her, and they heard about us on Google. So this is just for you to keep track of lead source information. I'm going to go ahead and say continue. Oh, I still have the new page from when I was showing you the example, so give me one sec. Let me just delete that really quick. So let's try that again. That's why I should never use the ones that I have live. Either way, so we have our information here. We go to our contact information. We can call this one Gavel practice plus mj@gmail.com, or imagine that your client is doing this information, so you're not actually having to physically type anything. So if your client is filling this out, they'd be logged into their portal. They'd have all of this stored into their own information in client portal, and then we could reuse that in the future. In this case, I'm having us just put the numbers, and that's because you're able to format numbers however you want. So in this case, I have it formatted on the back end to come out in a properly formatted phone number. And that's because people might put different formats and we might want to be consistent. So you could have this be different, but in my case, we're going to just have their number be 123, 123, 1234, and continue. For their mailing address, we can do something like 123 Demo Street. Their city is going to be San Marcos. Their county is San Diego. I'm biased because I'm from San Diego. Their mailing address will be, state will be California, and their zip code is 92069. They're going to continue. If they needed to, they could change any of these different answers as needed. They can continue to the end. And it just says thank you because we don't have any documents attached to this workflow. Now, if we go back to our dashboard, I'm just going to give this a quick refresh to make sure everything came through. If you go to your data manager now that we've ran this workflow and put in information, we'll see that the information has been input here. So I can actually see everyone who's run this. Do you see how I can see that it's owned by me, or that it's owned by practice account 33, or owned by number 4 or 31? I've made it to where it's obviously anonymized for the purposes of this demonstration, but you would see whoever your builder is, or whoever the person who owns that particular workflow is. So good job on running that. As the admin, I can see all of that, and I can see those past sessions, and I can still interact with that information and push it around. So there is a usefulness in centralizing the place of the admin and understanding the differences. You each can all see just your own time that you ran that, but I, as the admin, can see every time that anyone has run it from any builder account or from their user account, for example. So I can see mine here is that one that I own, and I can see the different answers. I can see that I didn't have a preferred name. And this goes back to what we talked about before. If you don't want to have to scroll across, if you have a really long workflow, you can use your filters here as well. So now we know how information gets stored in our data manager. And now that it's here, we can push that around when we build other workflows in the future. But we can also consider that we want to make sure that we use a consistent variable strategy when we create different workflows in the future, because we don't want to change something that is a necessary condition, such as their name, etc. So if we go into our workflows now, we're going to create a new one. So I'm just going to quickly check on time. So when we want to create a new workflow, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. The first thing I want you to test out, and actually I'm going to add a few more minutes because this would be normally at a different section. So what I want you to first do is, in the different templates that you downloaded, there are two that I want you to focus on right now. The first of which is the one that is a PDF that looks like this. When you open it, it's a caregiver's authorization affidavit that has like different fillable fields. And the other one is going to be the anti-coercion insurance disclosure that looks like this when you open it. Okay, so for these first two, they're going to illustrate a quick way to automate your documents using generative AI. It's a feature called Blueprint. So what you would do is, in your dashboard, you go over to new workflow. So I'm just going to say this is the purpose of this is to make it faster to create new workflows based on your documents. That's the purpose of this. So we're going to say new workflow. You could start with questions where we would be starting from scratch, or we can start from documents. Starting with our documents is going to enable that AI feature. Or you can observe that we can choose a pre-built workflow, which would take you over to the page where we could request to have one of these added to our account, like the one that we saw in the beginning, or we could run this workflow from here. Now, from here, we can say, start with documents for this example. And what we're going to do is we're going to upload, you could also just drag and drop these, the different templates that I showed you. So in our case, we're going to use the one that's the PDF, and the one that says that it's the anti-coercion insurance disclosure. So you can do more than one at a time. So if you had multiple documents, for example, sorry, I'm just going to make sure that this is the right one. Well, either way. So it's going to be, I believe, these two. Then go ahead and say open. Yeah. So you'll see that whatever number of documents, whether they're Word or PDF, will get attached here. And then we can say next. We can give this a name. So in our case, we could just say something like test of Blueprint for right now. And then we could put a date, for example, if we're going to distinguish this from something else. So we're just testing this. So it's just to quickly show you how it works. So from here, we have our test of this AI feature. And what's happening is the system is looking in your documents for the different places that things might need a question, right? So it's giving you this option to, for each value that it finds that might change when you generate this document, it will suggest a question. Then you can go ahead and say that I want to edit the questions that they've suggested, and I can make any changes that I need to. And I can review each individual card to see where it is in the document and if I want to make any changes. So as you can see from here, after we're done reviewing everything, we can just say draft workflow, and that's going to create a workflow for us, attach our documents to the back end, and insert all of those different variables into our documents. So on this particular document, I'm just going to quickly see that everybody was able to get to this point before we move on. And I show you the next piece. Was everyone able to try that? Awesome. Great. If you did have any issues, then Maddie can maybe help you in the background, or you can refer back to the recording. But as long as a couple people were able to kind of get to play with this a little bit, that's perfect. So you couldn't get the documents downloaded. Oh, okay. So can you go back, Tatiana, to this workflow and just download them each individually or as a zip file? And then see how you get on there. Okay, so from here, what I want to show you is that it's looking for all those different places, like I said, that repeat and that there would be a question that we would need to ask in order to fill in that information. And it's suggesting a variable to you. So it's suggesting the question that you might ask. In this case, I'm going to say, go up here and say edit question details. So it's asking here, it's suggesting that the minor's name might go here. That's pretty accurate, right? What's the name of the minor? What about the minor's date of birth? What about, and so if you click on each different section, you'll be able to see the suggested question, for example. You can't find, let me see. Sorry. Do you think maybe, Maddie, you could help Tatiana with the documents, or maybe even just send them to her? Okay, so we can see that the AI feature here is trying to suggest different places that might be the case based on the context. It's also seeing that there are check marks here that would be conditioned based on the answer, and then your date of birth, etc. So since we want to have a consistent variable structure and naming structure with our library, if there was a place that our main client, our contact, first name, etc. information would live or be pertinent, you would change that variable name here. So if we're representing the grandparent or uncle or the adult giving authorization here, then we would change the adult name to whatever would be relevant. In this case, it might be contact full name with first and last, or contact preferred name, or whatever the case may be. So you would make that change here. That will be reflected when it's drafted. I'm just showing you this kind of as a overall high level view first. So we don't have to make this perfect right now. And you can kind of toggle between the PDF that we have worked with and the Word document that we've worked with here to see the differences. Now, if there were similarities in your different documents, then the AI feature would try to find those similarities. So if, for example, borrower name was also pertinent to this question or showed up here, then it would combine those variables into a single question. And it would show you where they are in the document so you can make any changes if you need to. For example, in this single document, we can observe that there is the borrower name that shows up twice. So the borrower name shows up here, but also if we look at the card for borrower name here, we can see it down here as well. So that has been combined into a single question with a single variable so that we're able to just ask that question one time and it would populate in all those different places. Now I see a lot going on in the chat, so let me just make sure everybody's doing okay. Just a moment. So Maddie has added all of the documents as well. Do you need to have each of the documents saved as a docx and a PDF? You just need to have it, I think it's just for each one. The only one that has multiple options is the last one, the limited scope engagement agreement. That one just needs to be a docx. The PDF and everything, the PDF is the only one that needs to be a PDF, which is that caregiver authorization. And then let's see what else. Yeah, so let me see, Maddie, if you could send them, if there's one that's a PDF version of the limited scope engagement agreement, just send them the docx version. That'd be perfect. So Eli, hi, nice to see you. Always welcome. Yes, so Eli, I sent you an email with instructions. And then for
Yep, I
Tatiana,
just got it. I wasn't looking
hey,
at it, but
oh,
yep,
perfect.
all
Hey,
set.
good to see you.
Good to see you.
Um, and then for Tatiana, good job downloading, but you're not sure where to go from here. So where we are in the process right now is we have it utilized on our dashboard where it says new workflow. You're going to say start with documents. So just follow along here. You're going to say new workflow, start with document. And then from here, you're going to upload the caregiver's authorization and the anti-coercion insurance disclosure templates. And then you're going to say open and then give it a name, say next and give it a name. And then you'll be where we are here. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So now that we've gotten to this point, what we can do is we're going to say draft workflow. So up here at the top right, after we've gone through and made any changes that we need to, like if for example, it's the case that we're able to, and then sometimes you need to refresh it for the PDF if it goes away, for example, just refresh it. Don't be alarmed. But yeah, so if, for example, our adult here in this case is our client in most or every circumstance, then we can do that here. We can make that change here, or any other additional changes we would want to make to the wording of the question or anything else. We can do that here. You can also see that you can change the variable type. So if something is showing up as a text, you could change it to an email or a number or anything else you would want. You could also accept or reject different suggestions, and then it would just take off that piece. So once you're done with that, you would say draft workflow. And remember, our workflow is just that set of questions that we get to work with. So once we've said draft workflow, it's going to take a second and it's going to create that workflow for us, including all of the different suggested questions and their associated variables, as well as attaching those templates to our document templates section and inserting all of these created variables in the different places that they need to go in those documents. So we can see that if we get to this stage, we would just save and run this, and we'd be able to use this similar to how we use the client intake form. We would put in the minor's information, their date of birth, or whatever else as needed. Yeah, so what Maddie's saying is that I'm demonstrating a way to create a Gavel workflow, which creates a questionnaire that will populate a document. It's a way to build a first draft of your automation. So exactly. So you don't have to do that process every single time that you want to prepare this document. You just have to do it once to set the workflow up so that whenever you do want to use this workflow in the future, you just sign into your Gavel account, you find it in your dashboard, and then you run it. So this is just that first step or piece of the puzzle to getting that set up. Now we have about 30 minutes left total. So I want to see how everybody's doing really quick, how we're doing in the chat. Can you use Blueprint to add additional documents to an already existing workflow? No. And Sky says, wow, this is awesome. Thank you so much. But yeah, so that's how you use it. And then also I wanted to show you that the variables get added directly into the templates. So if you notice in your editor, you have, and your toolbar, for example, might be collapsed. You might be looking at a screen that looks like this. If that's the case and you want to be able to see this toolbar, which has a lot of really different handy features, you just click on where it says toolbar. And you don't need to do this right now, but note that you can move information or pages around using your toolbar. And you can also move questions from page to page, for example. So if I wanted to move this question down to a different page, I could do that, or if I wanted to reorder it. So you have a lot of customization ability here as well. So Caitlin says that she has to meet with a client interested working with Gavel and having an expert build for your practice. Amazing. I can, in my follow-up email, I'll send you all the information, but thank you for being here. Sky says, so we can use, for example, standard family law template forms from California website to build a workflow. Yes, correct, you can. And as Maddie mentioned here, there's also many of the forms that have already been automated under that pre-built workflow section, which we can go into as well. So it's worth checking out the library. And actually, let's just do that quickly now. So I showed this page before, but Maddie has added this into the chat. As Sky mentioned here, we don't want everyone who uses a standard form to automate that form necessarily, unless you want to have very specific structure in your documents, because if it's the same form across that jurisdiction, it's some standard court form that everyone has to use, we're endeavoring to build those out for you, and then you can just add those to your account. So you're not having to spend the time to build something that's already here for you. So one thing I'll mention at this juncture as well is if there is a workflow that you don't see, or a set of documents that you don't see here that you do want to use or have built, you can request one here in this note. It's called a note board, which is just a way to add a request. And then we as Gavel can see that, and you can upvote ones that other people have posted. So for example, people want Indiana petition for dissolution of marriage. They want things like a verified petition for the expungement of child abuse or neglect. They want New York forms. They want New Jersey forms and Maryland forms. And if you go to this, you'll also see which ones are in progress. So right now, in progress is all of these different documents as a set. So just to know that you can request something if it's not appearing here. So if we, for example, in this estate planning example, filter these forms down to estate planning, you can see which ones are already built out, which ones you're able to request to have added up to your account. For example, if you already have an account or if you're going to create one, and then you can try the workflow as Sky mentioned, if you want to see what's in them before you ask for them to be added to your account. You can see that in this Colorado informal probate case example, that all of these standard forms are going to generate based on your answers. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so making use of the ready-made Gavel workflows in the library is the fastest way to get started, especially if you're not interested in automating your own forms. Yeah, as Maddie mentioned, if you use these types of forms regularly and you just want to be able to generate that information, that really is the fastest way to do that. So Cindy said, is this for free or do we pay for Gavel to automate? So Cindy, the ones that are on this page are all available to you for free if you say try the workflow. So if you go to this page and you just go ahead and see what, let's say we're doing estate planning, for example, you can access this right now. You don't have to have an account or do anything else. So for example, let's say that we want to prepare this California estate planning package with a trust for a couple. We just say try the workflow and it takes us directly to this page where we can interact with this workflow and start using it without having to do anything else. And these are the things that are included, and it gives you some other instructions. The other piece is if you did want to have these added to your Gavel account so that you can make any updates or customizations, or if you want to be able to collect the information in your data manager, then you would want to have a Gavel account. Okay. So now that we have been able to see that a little bit more as well, I want us to be able to do an exercise where we build a few things together. So because we have about 26 minutes or so left, we're gonna just think about what we would want to do next in that process of what we said here, where we have our intake, engagement, and execution. So we've filled out the intake questionnaire, or we had our client fill that out, for example. Their information has been stored in our data manager so that when we're ready to engage them as a client, we could push the information into an engagement agreement. So that's one of the things that I had you download, as well as the Uniform Statutory Form Power of Attorney for our execution piece, if we're, for example, engaged to prepare a power of attorney for someone. So I want to just quickly show you something interesting about specifically the statutory form power of attorney. when you download this, which is one of the problems that we're trying, or the pain points that we're trying to address with Gavel as a tool, is when you search for this particular standard form, which is the Uniform Statutory Form Power of Attorney, it comes to you like this, which is extremely unhelpful. Which is essentially like an image. It's a PDF, but it's essentially an image because it doesn't even have fillable fields on it. So it forces you to download or to print this document essentially and manually handwrite it, and has very limited ability for you to prepare this in any efficient way. So what I actually did, and what you have now, is I copied and pasted that over into a template of a Word document that we can now use to practice with, and also to just see how much more useful that is to interact with it like this and have it be something that we could generate very quickly. For example, we can set something up in a way that, and before I show you that, I can just show you, this is the document that I'm talking about here, where I just copied and pasted all of the language, and now it's something that we could actually edit to a certain degree. And then I can go over back to, sorry, I was going to say, I was just going to show you how this works, or what it could look like after you automate this process. So instead of going through all those steps of, for example, just printing this out and then manually writing in everybody's names and trying to figure it out that way, and then somehow upload it back up, and all these different steps, you could, for example, if in this particular instance, I can show you the example of pulling information that's connected to your Clio account, if you have that as well. I have this example here of this Clio example. So if I run this one, what this is going to do, and not everyone, you don't have to use a Clio account in order to use Gavel, but if you do have that and you wanted to connect information together, you can. Similar to how we were talking about my case, but the difference being that Clio is what's called a native integration. So we have created the integration that connects these two systems together. So anything that is here is going to be reflected in Gavel as well. So for example, if I want to prepare the the power of attorney for this person, then I just look for their case in here, and that's going to automatically populate their information, such as their name and their address and their email and any other information that's relevant that I have chosen to have done here. And then I can also see that in this case, their agent's first name and last name, as well as their mailing address, has also been pulled through here, because we've designated them as a contact that's relevant as the agent here. So that's already getting pulled through. And to show you what this document would look like after it's prepared, I'm just going to answer any additional questions that I haven't answered before, or it doesn't live within Clio, for example. In this example, I can say I want to limit these powers, and then I can choose which ones I want to limit. If in the case of your, if it's actually normal practice that the client would manually sign with their initials when they do the notarization, you would do that. But this is just more to show you some logic capabilities, and also just that the question would be relevant. And then I can have any additional special instructions. I can choose whether this is going to continue if the person becomes incapacitated, yes or no, and have all of that logic run as well. Continue through here, and then that's going to populate and do all of the different logic here for us. So actually, it's much cleaner to prepare it this way as well, because we don't have all of those different instructions that aren't relevant, and all the different sections that aren't relevant have also been removed. So for example, I can see that I never had to type in Olivia's information, but I can review it before we print it and make any changes as needed. I didn't have to type in any information about the agent, because that pulled through as well. You could also see the example of if you took information from your client intake form or other Gavel workflow that your client filled out and push that into here, that's possible as well. And also what's happening in this document is that you're not seeing this, but what's happening in the background is, because we said that we're designating a single agent versus multiple agents, then you're not seeing an S here because we have a single agent, as well as attorney instead of attorneys in fact. in this example, I had the first letter and the first letter of their first name and first letter of their last name, their initials, pull through here automatically as well. Like I said, if it's normal practice that the person would manually physically type their initials, then that's not relevant here. But if I had said that I want all of the powers to be granted, then these would all be blank and just OL would appear on this end line. So that logic is happening in the background as well. If we had said that we don't want this to continue to be effective, even though the person becomes incapacitated, then this would go away. And if we had any special instructions additionally, you would see them here. Also, what you're not seeing here, but could live here, is an entire section about how the multiple agents are to act jointly or separately or otherwise. So because we said single agent versus multiple, then you don't see that section here as well. So that is how, and obviously if you were not going to have them notarized on that day, you could not put this particular one here. You could have their name appear, you could have before me, this is the notary's information, but you could have Olivia's name here and whatever else. But the point is that we've taken a very unhelpful form and automated that unhelpful form to be something that we can prepare very quickly without having to go through all this manual work. Okay, so it looks like Maddie was helping Cindy with some questions. If anyone else has any questions at this juncture, you can let me know as well. Okay. So now that we've seen some examples of this all in practice, and also we know what the different pieces are available to us for pre-built workflows, like I mentioned, you can go to that section and see what's available to you right now, either to use just because you need to fill out all of those different forms. So for example, the ones that we've shown, or you can request that new sets be built if you don't see something that you need using that note board here, which I'll just put in the chat one more time as well. Eli is so kind as to say pure gold for our attorney clients and pairs perfectly with, well, so this is remote notarization, right, Eli? Remote online notarization, I believe.
Yes, yes.
Yay.
Really good stuff.
Yeah, I listen to you. So Eli's from
Uh,
the Best Notary, which is a service that helps with online notarization for your clients as well. So you should hit him up as well since he's here. Okay,
quick question,
yeah,
Brittany. Can I
go
ask a
for it.
question? How big is your form repository and is it state specific? If I have clients who want specific forms for their state, got
Yeah,
clients in Massachusetts or,
right.
Florida.
Good question. So if you go to this particular section, then you can actually filter this by jurisdiction. So if you said like Massachusetts or Louisiana or something, if we don't have it, if you search for that and we don't have it, just request it on that other form. Because this is a new initiative that we're starting so that we can meet the needs, and we're doing it by kind of by who's requesting. So we can prioritize it that way. So if you've added to the set list to say, I want this to be automated, then we can prioritize that based on the interests that people have. And people are upvoting as well, like I mentioned, where you can see if there is something that you don't see, but somebody's already added it, you can just click this button right here and upvote that. So somebody, for example, 2 people really want this particular one. So if you really want this Indiana petition as well, then you can upvote that, or any of these other ones as well. But great question. As
Very
far as
cool.
similarly to the templates repository, when we're specifically talking about templates versus workflows, there are quite a lot of templates in here. So meaning all of the different form sets come like one workflow, one questionnaire will produce 14 documents or 20 documents. So depending on what the set needs. So if you're, all the different court forms to that you need to prepare in order to initiate probate, for example, or whatever else, then you can generate all those documents at once. Good questions. Do you have any other questions, Eli?
Yeah, so what are the sources of the documents? Let's say I'm looking for
Yeah,
like a special needs trust or like a really
right.
advanced trust. Who drafts those and,
Yeah.
does it tie back to some sort of authority?
Yes. Good question. So the answer is that a lot of the ones that we have automated in this setting are generally like more standard court forms or something that would be the standard form that is not produced by a lawyer, for example. It's like the ones that lawyers use, not necessarily ones that a lawyer has drafted to create the template itself. So this would come from whatever the official source is of that document. So whether that be like a state court form, like repository, or I think there's something called like there's something I think in Michigan that's quite specific, and they have to use those forms. So they would be those forms that you have to use. So discretionary forms, that would be something like a little bit more optional language, or it's not a standard form from the court, for example, or mandated by the jurisdiction. That would be from a Gavel expert that's working with a subject matter expert that's a lawyer that works in that particular practice area. So that would be things like wills and trusts, like you mentioned, or any other kind of specifics. And Maddie can kind of talk more about that as well in the chat if you want to answer that more as well. Let's see. Sky says, are you combining all the forms one would need to initiate separation? For example, in California, these all are combined together in a workflow. So Maddie also mentioned for the other question, sometimes we're pairing with the attorney who requested the form. So in that case, for example, in that example, in Vermont, for example, we had specifically like probate attorneys who wanted the forms to let us use their forms in order to automate them. And they've been practicing for many years. Okay, so the question about combining the forms, or if we will need to, like all the forms that you would need for some specific thing. So there are many documents connected to that. So let me just show you that quick example as well. I think we're talking about, in this case, more like a family law, sort of like petition to initiate divorce, for example, I think is what you mean, Sky. So in that case, we could filter down, and then I think my internet is having an issue. So you would just go to this page and filter it down, and then whatever yeah, here we go. Sorry, my internet's being a bit weird. But you can see that these would all be part of that single workflow. And that goes back to our initial foundational conversation around this piece around like being able to reuse and repurpose information and creating a master template, where in this case, the way that this is set up, and I know this is more of a family law example than an estate planning example, but the same concept applies. So in this case, we have the FL 100, the FL 110, and that goes back to Eli's question about what forms or what source or what authority. So these are just the standard forms that are used for this particular thing from the court. So you have to use an FL 100 for the petition, or this for the summons, et cetera, et cetera. So you can say, these are the forms that I want to create right now. You could have all of them. You could just have some of them if you don't need to prepare the entire thing right now. And then because this is all within the same workflow, the way it's set up is that if you have the person's name and their date of birth and their address and all these different pieces showing up across all of these different documents many different times, or if there are things that are conditional based on this information, then that's all considered here as well. So I hope that answers the question. That's really helpful. Thanks, Sky. Let's see. That's exactly what you're asking. Eli asks, any plans to partner with drafting software companies like Logic, Interactive Legal, Adapt, WC at all? That's a good question. So I don't think we currently have plans for that. I think it would probably be a little bit in the reverse of like, we would be saying use Gavel to automate the documents in your repository and then offer that workflow to your clients versus like them just having, different document sets. So it's not currently in the works, but it's a good question as well. Okay, I know that this is quite a long session, so I want to make sure everybody's doing okay. But essentially, what we've talked about so far is a lot of different pieces. Let me just make sure we're following along the way that I wanted to. So we've talked a little bit about the execution of the power of attorney. And then for the engagement agreement, we can go into that piece a little bit as well. I'm just going to go through the rest of my slides, and then we can come back and spend more time together on these different pieces. But the first thing is that we've talked about using pre-built workflows, how you can go to that page, you can select which one you want, you can try the workflow right now to make sure that those are the documents that you need and that you want to use. You can practice using that. But if you want to have that information reusable and have that be in your account, you would need to get a Gavel account. And then you could have that added to that and make any different customizations as far as, for example, what is said or how it's phrased or whatever else. So that's going to, once you go through that document, like we saw in the beginning, it will generate all of those documents at once for you and customize them to the answers, including formatting, which is something we haven't talked about yet. You do have the ability to make things that are all uppercase, for example, taking the information and moving it around like we talked about with different combinations of names and structures. Okay, so I want to touch a little bit on working with an expert. So somebody mentioned, 30 minutes ago, since it's a long session, that they're interested in doing this, but they might not have a lot of time. And if we go back all the way to the beginning where I showed you the agenda, remember I said that there's a spectrum of involvement or a degree of involvement in the building process. So we talked about automating our custom templates, which would be something like we used the Gavel AI blueprint feature where we dropped our templates into the system and we were able to draft a workflow and have those pieces of information added in. We could create our own custom client intake questionnaire. You don't have to have it look like mine. And you'll see this on your accounts as well, if you want to see what it looks like to have that pre-built workflow added to your account, you'll see the estate planning with trust for a couple in California workflow. And like I showed you, the benefit of that would be that you're able to run that, put all the client's information or assign that to someone to fill out, and then all the information gets stored for them as well as for you. That would be this middle piece of using pre-built workflows. So that's a little bit less involved in the building process because somebody's already built that for you. The part that might be a little bit involved is making sure that you're considering your variable strategy. If you want your petitioner name to be your contact's first name or whatever else. And we can give you some best practice tips on how to make changes. I believe I saw an article in the Help Center from Maddie where she goes through things to consider if you're going to make any updates to the pre-built workflows because they're quite extensive. So you want to be just aware of what things to think about. And then the lowest degree of involvement in the building process, if you are super busy, like me, for example, as well, I'm also quite busy. I don't necessarily always have time for every single thing. So if you want to work with an expert, I'm going to show you how you can do that as well. And Gavel experts are people who are like me, who love the tool and love playing with it and are really good at logic. This particular person, Anja Sarah Lahady, was one of the people who built out a lot of these pre-built workflows that you're interacting with and seeing. So she's very highly skilled, same as everyone else on this list as well. To access this page, if you want to see who our Gavel experts are and who you might want to work with, you can, from gavel.io, go over to resources. From the gavel.io website, go to resources, and then under resources, you'll see the option here to hire an automator. So an automator is just somebody who automates your documents for you. I'll put this in the chat as well. So you're able to see and go through and see the bios of each different person. You can see their profile. You can book a time with them. You can see kind of what they're specifically good at. For example, Ash is quite good at things like making it look like your brand. So one of the things you can do with a Gavel questionnaire is you can take off this entire header and you can make it match your particular style. So your brand colors, for example. So he's really, really good at that type of code, like CSS and specifications and customizations. So as Maddie mentioned in the chat, you can also reach out to help@gavel.io if you want a recommendation based on your needs, because everyone has a different specialization. For example, if you do have Clio or another CRM or practice management solution and you want to be able to utilize or repurpose that information, Dawn Duthat is a certified Clio consultant, so she would be able to help you there. Eli, for the average hourly fees or rates for these experts, that's a really good question. I was a builder and an automator on the side of the person who builds out the workflows and not coming up with the payment structure. So I think each different one, based on their specializations, will have a different range. So I can't really give a number specifically, but you could negotiate as well if there's someone you want to work with, but maybe their fees are cut off high. You can negotiate. Maybe they start building you with your intake questionnaire, and that's something that you could then duplicate and use in your other workflows. So you can be creative if you have a smaller budget. Speaking of budget, let's talk a little bit about pricing in the last few minutes here as well. Also, I just was going to quickly mention that as an emerging opportunity for you might see, now that we've talked about all these different pieces, that there's a market or an opportunity to take the workflows that you create and put a paywall in front of them and have your clients pay for that document set. And then you can decide the degree based on your involvement with the case, whether you need to help them review those documents or whatever else. You can turn these into legal products. So these are a couple of examples of people who have done this as well. Specifically, DOS Docs has done quite well, as well as Hello Divorce. And Counsel Your Docs is a Canadian one that has for a shareholder agreement document set that is about $695. So for pricing, we're in the space where we want to be able to help people who are solo and small firm lawyers, not only going after the big budget enterprise accounts. So billed annually, this breaks down per month to about $83 a month. Or if you, for like a lighter plan where you just have one of those builder seats where you're able to have like an admin who builds different workflows, for example, there's limitations around like how many document templates you have, etc. But you can see the different pricing tiers, how they break down per month. You can also go to our pricing page to see all of the different comparisons. We did talk about how if you want to use the pre-built workflows, you can do that for free. But if you want to repurpose that information and have that stored and have your own ability to send out the client portals and all the different pieces, then you want to be at the pro plan so that we can add those to your account for you. Now, if you do want to sign up today, you can start a free trial if you go to start.gavel.io/pay, and then I'll just put this in the chat. But I wanted to point out that we have a promo code for today's workshop. If you use workshop-50, you can get 50% off for the first month if you want a monthly plan, or you can get 5% off an annual plan with Workshop 5. So I'm just going to quickly also put up this page here so you can get my contact information, Brittany@gavel.io, and you can start your free trial here, or you can just scan this QR code, and here are those promo codes again. So really take advantage of the fact that you're able to get 50% off your first month or 5% off an annual plan. And just be sure to use this link if you want to sign up today. So we have about 1 minute left. I'm going to quickly check what is 100 sessions per month under this plan. And so as far as sessions, I think it's not sessions, right? I think it's more templates, builder seats, etc. Kathy needs to jump off for an appointment, but I really appreciate you being here, Kathy. Thanks for coming. If anyone else needs to jump off, feel free to go. We are at time. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time, for spending 2 hours with me. I really do hope that this was useful information. I'm just going to quickly pull the pricing page so that I can send that to you as well, or the referral link. Give me 1 second if you want. But if you didn't mind just giving me 1 moment, that's my fake British accent going through. Let me pull, and I'll send you all the different resources and so on to your email after I've had a chance to put this all together for you. Let me just see. This one here. So if you want to start a free trial, you can do so. Oh, thanks, Cindy. And then if you want to see the pricing page, let me get that link for you as well. Unless somebody can beat me to it. And you'll be able to see from the plans and pricing page, the question around if that's number of sessions or templates, you can see the comparisons there. Yeah, perfect. So where Sky put the picture, you can see the different templates and sessions. I see what you mean. Okay, sorry, I didn't realize that. So yeah, 100 sessions per month, 300 sessions a month, custom or 600. So but yeah, so you can go ahead and look through those comparisons. I'm gonna go ahead and let everybody go since we're at time and just thank you again for your time. If you want to stay on, I can stay on for a few minutes with Maddie, maybe just a few minutes to go over to answer any additional questions. But thanks again, and we'll see you guys next time. Some of you are coming next week, so I'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone.